Hi, it's Nathan here. First Aid in the Workplace Code of Practice provides advice to businesses on how to ensure they have effective first aid response measures for their workers. The first few sections talk about like the risk profile and determining our first aid needs. So for example, if we've got 5 people in an office in Brisbane with a medical centre or a hospital down the road, your first aid requirements are going to be very different to a 500-man work site on a mine in the middle of nowhere. You know, typically those larger sites in remote areas will have paramedics on site, trained paramedics with full like first aid equipment, almost like mini ambulances ready to go. Whereas, you know, your small office building will typically have like a small first aid kit, maybe not even. But yeah, they should have one. But yeah, things we need to consider are the location, nature of the work being completed, size of the workforce. Also need to like have individual considerations. So things like medical alerts, has anyone got pacemakers, EpiPens? I know schools is a big one with like anaphylaxis and like allergies and asthma as well. So yeah, then it goes to talk about first aid kits. So most places will just have like a stock standard first aid kit and that's fine. But the trick for business is you need to consider the work that you're doing. So for example, if we're working in a kitchen and we can get burns, we may need a burns kit. If we're working out in the middle of nowhere, we may need a snake bite kit and insect repellent. Large construction sites, I think they're sort of getting more and more common to have like trauma kits, like tourniquets and stuff. But then you need people trained in how to use them, which you do get a bit of an intro on that in the general first aid course, but obviously that's kind of a, you know, you don't go to a first aid course thinking you're going to be putting on a tourniquet the next day. So probably some higher levels of training for that sort of equipment. But yeah, other things, other equipment, eye wash bottles, if we're using HazChem, there's certain situations where emergency showers are recommended as well, like if we're using bulk acids, transferring chemicals, where we could get covered in chemicals, defibs for electrical work. Then it talks about first aid facilities. So most places aren't going to really have any first aid facilities. They'll just have the first aid equipment, like the first aid kit. But first aid facilities could be like on a bigger site, you have like a dedicated first aid room with like a sink where the first aider can wash their hands and maybe a bed for the person to lay down on. You'll have all your first aid equipment there. And then yeah, first aid trained personnel. So this is a hard one to comply with, and remember, it is only a code, so you don't technically legally have to comply with this, but it says we need 1 in 25 workers trained in first aid for high-risk workplaces and 1 in 50 for low-risk workplaces. And this is kind of a good example of where the real world meets the paper world meets the real world. Really good example, because 1 in 25 on a high-risk workplace sounds great, right? 1 in 25, easy. We got 100 people, we get 4 people trained, great. What if we've got 5 people on site? What if we've got 2 people on site? You can't have 1/10 of a person trained in first aid. So if we've got, let's say 3 people on site, you still need 1 person trained in first aid to comply with that 1 in 25. What happens if they now go on lunch? You're now non-compliant, right? So once you get down, so that 1 in 25 rule, once you apply it to these small work crews, you're basically saying everyone needs first aid training, which is great in theory, like we get everyone first aid trained, but you know, it's just a cost for business and difficult to implement. So yeah, that's first aid trained personnel. The standard first aid course is like, I think it's called Apply First Aid. And then you'll also get CPR. It's required that you refresh the CPR yearly, which is painful. Everyone's always out of date for CPR, but you know, not a bad idea to keep that up to date. And then, yeah, the Apply First Aid expires 3 yearly. Not a legal breach if you're out of date, but you're not compliant with the code, so you should try to comply if you can. And then we have to make sure that workers are aware of this stuff. So they need to be made aware of where first aid equipment is located, who the first aiders are. And then as part of like our emergency response drills, we need to make sure that we're not just doing fire drills and emergency evacuation drills, that we're, you know, factoring in medical emergencies and first aid emergencies in there as well. So, you know, throw in every now and again a CPR emergency drill or a heart attack emergency drill or a EpiPen or something like that, so that we keep making sure that these procedures aren't just sitting there, and then when we do have a medical emergency, no one knows what's going on. We need to make sure they're ready. And then our first aid procedures need to be reviewed after incidents or after issues are raised through consultation with workers. Hope that helps.